Welcome to the third video essay in my series about Pathologic Classic HD. There will always be sacrifice in the end. I'm honestly surprised that the both of us are here. I got a bit burned out just making the first video in the series and kind of assumed I would just end up abandoning the project, but then people were watching it for some reason, so anyways, thank you. I really appreciate it, seriously. As you've probably gathered from the title of this video, I'm going to be dissecting the endings of Pathologic in detail. If you are not familiar with the different routes and endings of Pathologic, and you don't mind spoilers for this bizarre indie game that came out in 2005, I would recommend that you watch the first two videos of this series before starting this one. I'll include links to those videos in the description. I will also add that if you're familiar with Pathologic because you watched another review video on YouTube, you'll probably have enough basis to follow what's going on, but none of those other videos covers everything that I want to touch on here because Pathologic has such a massive plot. As such, if you end up confused by this video, I would again recommend that you go back and watch the first two videos in this series. Or, just roll with the confusion. I understand that each of my earlier videos is about 42 minutes long, and that's a huge time commitment if you're only interested in what I have to say in this video. So with all of that out of the way, let's get down to it. Let's answer that classic gamer question. Part 5. So, which ending is best? I've talked about the Bachelor ending, the Haruspex ending, and the Changeling ending in my previous videos. As a refresher though, Bachelor destroyed the town to save the Polyhedron, Haruspex destroyed the Polyhedron to save the town, Changeling saved the town and the Polyhedron by sacrificing the lives of 7 people with the help of her magic hands. I suppose I should note here that technically there is also a fourth ending, but the fourth one is unambiguously garbage, just basically everything gets shelled by the military, so we won't worry about it here. Setting aside the garbage fourth ending though, which of those 3 primary endings is best? Honestly, I think this is a really fair question to ask when you're talking about Pathologic. While I was playing this game, this is something that particularly plagued me. Hey, you get it? Because it's a game about a... I'm so sorry. I unintentionally wrote that pun. You'll have to take it up with my subconscious that keeps adding terrible puns to my script. In scores of other video games, if you do certain things and make certain sacrifices and trigger certain events, you get the clear best ending, the golden ending. Pathologic is not like that. All of the endings are bad in some way. All require sacrifice. It's almost like, the title of this video essay series had a meaning to it when I selected it. I've actually given this section a subtitle that is a more accurate representation of the discussion to come. Part 5. So, which ending is best? Or in other words, what do you do when all of the endings are bad? Let me circle first to the Haruspex ending, which I suspect the majority, or at least the plurality of people who play Pathologic believe is the quote-unquote best ending. Part 5.A. Is saving the town best? As I noted earlier, in the Haruspex ending, the Polyhedron is destroyed, yes, but the town is saved. Not only saved, it's cured. With the sacrifice of the Polyhedron, the underground blood flowing in the channels beneath the town pours from the gap in the earth where the Polyhedron used to be. Artemy can then use this blood to make enough panacea for everyone. Since the physical evidence points to the Polyhedron having caused the outbreak by puncturing pockets of underground bacteria as it shifted over time, the plague may never come back with the Polyhedron gone. And on a more spiritual level, a number of the people in town believe that there is some sort of law with a capital L that forbids the capturing of miracles. As such, the plague was retribution by the earth for building the Polyhedron. If that really is the case, then with the Polyhedron gone, the plague should disappear as well. However, the Polyhedron, this monumental achievement for scientific progress both on a physical and metaphysical level, is gone. Perhaps the Canes can build a new Polyhedron, a Polyhedron 2.0, 2 poly, 2 hedron, as it were, but that is uncertain. Peter Stamatin is the main mind behind the Polyhedron, and as shown in the Bachelor's route, even while the Polyhedron was around, he doubted whether he would be able to make anything that could match it. Knowing Peter, the loss of the Polyhedron will devastate him. He will not be able to create anything else like it for some time, if ever. On top of that, the plague might go away, but it is not certain that it will go away. And I think it's important to note something that I skimmed over in my discussion of Artemy's route and his ending. Artemy is now the foreman of the abattoir and the leader of the kin. As such, he is authorized to remove the bull's lifeblood from the ground to make the panacea. However, the butchers refuse to show Artemy where the access point is to the lifeblood in the abattoir unless Artemy made a sacrifice. Now, I personally think that destroying the Polyhedron housing Simon Kane should be a sufficient sacrifice for the town, but apparently the butchers do not agree. The butchers specifically wanted Artemy to sacrifice Aglaia Lilich the Inquisitor for the town. There are reasons for the butchers calling for Aglaia's sacrifice that I will not get into at the moment. The main thing to remember is that the powers that be had promised to kill Aglaia only if the town did not survive. In Artemy's ending, however, the town certainly survives, and therefore Aglaia survives as well. As such, while Artemy has access to the bull's blood via the place where the Polyhedron used to be, and should certainly have the resources to make enough panacea to save the whole town, he still will not know where the main access point to the blood is. This could be a problem if the plague ever returns. We don't know how much blood will pour from the Polyhedron's wound. We don't know if the panacea keeps if Artemy can make some sort of stockpile from it. For that matter, while it seems like the underground supply for making panacea is fairly limitless, we do not know this for certain. Even if Artemy does convince the butchers to show him where the access point for the bull's blood is, who knows if and when the blood will run out, particularly since there are now no more Aurochs to sacrifice. Shifting our focus away from the plague, the wheel also features prominently in Artemy's ending cinematic. According to kin mythology, the wheel represents a return to the beginning, so the town goes back to the way it was, presumably. I love this town, I really do. I have spent so many hours wandering around this bizarre little city in the steppe. So this is a good thing, right? Or is it? Because when you consider it, as much as I care about this town, it has some real problems. The ruling families, which are supposed to serve as checks on one another, just as often get in the way of things that need to be done due to their infighting, and I should know, Daniil and I should know this. There is also the fact that the town has a real issue with violence. In the dialogue of the game, the townspeople claim that the level of violence in this town is abnormal, that it was stepped up to 11 because of the plague, and I believe that, I do. But even so, there are literal gangs of orphaned children that wander the streets and fight violently with each other using guns and razors, and nobody seems to bat an eye at this. This is not normal. This is not the sign of a healthy town. Then there's the violence within the kin itself. I really struggle how to approach this point. I appreciate that the kin are an indigenous people who have been oppressed by an outside colonizing force. It is also clear over the course of the game and in all three storylines that the kin suffer from prejudice. It's even possible that some of their violent nature is a reaction to the way that they have been treated by their colonizers. To be honest, there is a whole other video essay to be written on this point. I am not going to delve too deeply into the effects of colonialism on the world of Pathologic because, frankly, I really think that discussion should be had in connection with Pathologic 2, where all of these issues are amped up to another level entirely. However, even just grazing on this idea at a surface level, colonialism is clearly at play here and should not be discounted. But even given that the kin are an oppressed people, I think it is fair to say that there is a considerable amount of violence that is normalized within the kin culture. For example, it seems that most infractions of the internal rules of the kin, no matter how minor, are typically punished with death. In fact, when you talk to Foreman Oyun as Claire, he tells you that he has personally killed something like 92 members of the kin. I don't necessarily want to impose my ideals that have almost certainly been informed by the post-colonialist society I live on to a culture that is not my own. I appreciate that this is a fantasy culture, but there are still clearly roots to this culture that stretch into our reality. But still, that seems not great. This isn't to mention the fact that when the kin call for the head of one of the Vladolgimskis as recompense for locking them in the termitary, the block of housing that they occupy near the abattoir, while the plague raged through and decimated their population, it is highly suggested that the butchers will even cannibalize which Vlad is brought to appease them. On top of that is the way that the kin treat women, and in particular the herb brides. An herb bride, for your reference, is a member of the kin who dances in order to spur the growth of Twir, an herb that is special to the kin. If there are any viewers out there who have played Pathologic 2 but not the first Pathologic, I need to emphasize something before I go further. The herb brides are treated very differently in the first Pathologic, both by the game and by the kin themselves. I have thoughts about how the herb brides are framed and used within the narrative of Pathologic 2, but again, that is another video essay, and regardless, I appreciate that their treatment is far more nuanced in Pathologic 2. In the first Pathologic, let me give you a couple of examples that illustrate what I mean. Artemis' first real meaningful encounter with an herb bride is through a side quest where an Odong worm asks you to find his herb bride daughter. She has run away to be with the Odong she loves, as opposed to the Odong her father has arranged for her to marry. Yes, I realize that this implies that the herb brides are the same species as the worms. I don't know if this is true. There is some evidence to suggest that this is not, even though this one Odong calls this lady his daughter. Either way, I've debated this on the Discord and I don't want to get shouted at again. You can force her to go back to her arranged marriage, and Artemis' notes are particularly calloused on this point, indicating that herb brides are essentially considered property. These brides may be sold and bought, or even borrowed, which is not considered inappropriate. Their Odong profit for them, so when this bogworm asks me to bring his bride back, he is simply taking care of business. There is little emotion involved. When I talked about violence within the kin, I know I waffled a bit on my judgment call, but I am a-okay with making a value judgment here. That is a huge yikes for me. Even if Artemis decides to let the herb bride be with the Odong she loves, his notes don't say something along the lines of, well, it was her choice to make, this is the right thing to do, to respect her agency, etc. No, he says that if she's chosen to stay, it is really because the Earth has decided it, and she is simply more sensitive to the Earth. Ugh. And then there is the fact that you can literally sacrifice an herb bride, as in murder an unwilling herb bride through a ritual sacrifice. Let me give you the context for this. When Artemis procures the living heart for Daniil during the Haruspex playthrough, he has 3 options for where he can get that heart. All of them are bad and violent and upsetting. So first he can murder the young woman who is waiting for Daniil so they could go talk to her father, which is what happens when you play Daniil's route. Second, he can journey into the steppe where he has heard that some butchers are planning to sacrifice an herb bride. They want to kill the herb bride as a means to appease the earth to try to stop the plague. They ask Artemis to do it for them once he shows up. Artemis can. He can sacrifice the herb bride himself for a huge bump in reputation. Or he can refuse, after which the butchers attack him. Artemis kills the butchers in self-defense, harvesting one of their hearts in the process. But looping back to the sacrifice of the herb bride, admittedly, this does not seem like a run-of-the-mill sacrifice to the butchers. They are nevertheless real keen on performing it, despite the fact that the herb bride herself is not on board with this. If you actually talk to the herb bride in question, she begs you not to kill her. She even talks about how she dreams about having a daughter and raising her to be an herb bride in the ways of the kin. And yet, notwithstanding all of that, the kin see it as a good thing if you kill her. You get a huge reputation boost. And along those lines, if you instead decide to kill the herb bride who is waiting for Daniil so that you can procure her heart, before you kill her, she will mention to you that regardless of what you decide to do with her, she must obey you because you are a leader within the kin. That's not just one yikes, that's a whole bucket full of yikes, my friends. So many yikes. And okay, sure, perhaps Artemis will fix the violence and misogyny within the kin now that he is foreman. It's possible. I'm just not, as you can probably tell from the tone of my voice, particularly optimistic about the chances that Artemis will address these issues. If Daniil struggles with his pride and Claire struggles with her tendency to invent evil twin sisters, then Artemis struggles with a tendency to use violence to solve his problems. Violence is a reoccurring theme throughout the game, but it is especially present with Artemis. Artemis has the opportunity to murder a literal child at the beginning of his route. He can also decide that very same day to vindictively kill one of the men who attempted to stab him at the train station but managed to get away. Ironically, the same man that Claire ends up healing on her route. As I just discussed, one of his main quests involves him killing a member of his own people to procure their heart. And only one heart option is arguably justifiable because at least you were killing those butchers in self-defense and in defense of that poor herb bride. Even near the end of the game where Artemy is going through those trials for Oyun, one of the things he has to do is kill a bunch of members of the kin who have apparently committed some sort of infraction. I think it should be apparent that you can easily play Artemy as the Ripper that the town believes him to be. And as I just discussed with respect to that arranged marriage subplot, Artemy apparently has no problem with treating herb brides like property, and not respecting their agency beyond the ways in which their decisions may or may not intersect with what the quote-unquote Earth wants. It's possible he'll try to improve the kin as their leader, it's just that I kind of doubt it. But to be entirely fair to the kin, they aren't the only ones that struggle with violence and misogyny. I've already talked a bit about how a great deal of violence seems normalized in the town. Now let me talk about the ever-so-fun discussion of the intersectionality between violence and misogyny within the greater town at large. So much fun! There is definitely no chance of this video attracting trolls! On day one, there is rampant paranoia in the town about the murders of Simon and Isidore having been perpetrated by the Shabnakadir, a mythical steppe monster that takes the form of a woman. So on day one, Daniel can also watch an herb bride be burned at the stake for allegedly being a Shabnakadir. Sometimes women will also just be brutally beaten in the streets for no reason on day one, which I found incredibly confusing when I played as Daniel. It was only when I played as Artemy that I realized, oh, these idiot men think these rando women are also the Shabnak. Then I screamed a little bit inside. Then of course there's the fact that when everyone in the cathedral dies, the ruling families immediately blame it on a number of local women. And sure, you could perhaps argue that a witness apparently saw a woman going into the cathedral and that woman was evil Clara, but trust me, I interviewed everyone inside the cathedral. There were no credible witnesses, nobody had a straight story, and yet everyone blamed a woman. I talk about all of this at length because I don't see any really critiques of the game discussing the problem of violence against women in this town. And this is also one of the biggest problems I have with the whole Save the Town ending. The town is being returned to the beginning, and yet there is something profoundly wrong with the town. The town needs to change. And, okay, you may tell me that the whole symbolism with the wheel returning the town to the beginning actually represents a new beginning for the town. That is possible. Capella Olgimskaya has plans to rebuild the town along with Artemy's gaggle of bound children. She will marry Khan Kane to create a peace between the Kanes and the Olgimskis. The Sabrobs will eventually die out because Katerina cannot have children. As such, the tension between the three ruling families of the town will hopefully fade away. The rest of Artemy's bound kiddos have their roles as new mistresses and builders and merchants. If everything goes as Capella plans, the town may become something new and wondrous. The ending cinematic that plays even inspirationally shows the children retaking the city and the streets. And perhaps Capella can do it. I love Capella, I really do. She genuinely seems to have the town's best interests at heart, unlike most of the characters in this game, and she has the advantage of being a fledgling mistress-to-be with prophetic visions. Maybe she'll succeed in reforming the town. But she's also young and potentially naive. It's hard, for example, to forget that two of the main players in her scheme are literally rival gang leaders. Will they honestly let go of the violence that they are used to when they join forces with her? Maybe, but if I'm being entirely honest, I'm a bit skeptical. I want Capella to succeed, I just don't know that she will. I think that there is a very good chance that things will continue as they were, that the town's problems will continue, and that is honestly really disappointing. So if there are major issues with saving the town a la the Harrispecs, Part 5.b, is saving the Polyhedron best? Now we come to Daniel's option, destroy the town, save the Polyhedron. I know most people who get this ending dismiss it as not great, but I don't necessarily think this is the wrong ending to choose. Give me a second, let me finish.
What? Let her finish.
Let me make that argument. First of all, the Polyhedron survives in Daniel's choice. Regardless of how you feel about the whole housing Simon's soul aspect about the tower, the Polyhedron is truly a magnificent scientific achievement that seems deserving of preservation. As I mentioned, some members of the town believe that the sand pest is retribution for the Polyhedron defying the laws of physics and understanding, but as Daniil points out, if we allowed ourselves to believe that about science, mankind would never make any progress. On day 8, he has the following conversation with Capella. The Canes have set up a seditious experiment. The Stomatans brag that they had overcome the laws of gravity and Euclidean geometry, whilst in reality it was the Canes who took it upon themselves to attack the laws of sorcery and the miraculous powers that stumble upon our world from time to time. While the Stomatans were building ladders, the Canes were creating foci. If everybody settled for this line of thinking, humankind would have never conquered the skies or explored the nature of flame. And then, he and Capella have a weird conversation about how the Polyhedron doesn't create miracles, it imprisons them. Yes, we get it. The Polyhedron is weird. But honestly, I think Daniil is right. There is also the fact that the Canes and their associates have plans to rebuild the town on the other side of the river, the side that houses the Polyhedron. Peter Stomatan is, of course, already drawing up plans for additional impossible buildings that will defy logic and understanding. They want the new city to be a utopia. I am honestly unsure of whether this is a good or a bad thing. I would guess that most players are similar to me and have mixed feelings on this point. On the one hand, I generally consider the Canes to be the most reasonable of the ruling families, given that Alexander Stomatin has a tendency to shoot first and ask questions later, and the Olgimskis are literally exploiting the kin's labor for profit. By contrast, the Canes are intellectual elitists, but at least they know what they are, and they generally do not sabotage their rivals or the protagonists they are not aligned with in the same way that the other ruling families do. On the other hand, as both Katerina Saburova and the Inquisitor point out, utopias are often built by intellectuals at the expense of the common man, and what is utopian for the designer may not be utopian for the people actually building and occupying the space. I find this to be a valid point. I think it's an especially valid criticism when you remember that this game came out in Russia, and Russia has a long and storied history with leaders who say, look, we're going to make a great new Russia, a Russia for everyone, and then thousands of common people die. And yet, when you talk to Maria Kena about her plans for the new city, she explains that this town already is, in its own way, a utopia. Let me pull up the map for a second. As you can see, the town is divided into 3 sections. The rightmost section is called Earth and houses the abattoir. It is also the section of town that the Saburovs live in. The middle section is called the Knots and is where the Olgimskis live. And finally, this left section is called the Stoneyard. This is where the Canes live, right across from the Polyhedron. As Maria accurately notes, the town progresses from the steppe and the abattoir and the earth, to the settlement and the human world, to the superhuman and the Polyhedron. Maria appreciates the importance of this dichotomy. Everyone may not have the same vision of utopia as the Canes, but at least Maria, the head of the project, understands that a utopia is more than simply a shrine to the elite. They do want the utopia to include everyone. In fact, when you talk to her brother Khan about her plans, he indicates that he is unhappy with the idea of being ruled by her, but this is for petty reasons. It mostly seems to be because he and his gang of children that live in the Polyhedron are being kicked out so that Simon Kane's soul can be moved there, and it turns out that Peter already has plans to build them a new space to play in. Even the children will not be forgotten in the utopia. But is this enough? Does this assuage these concerns about the Canes' theoretical utopia? The Canes are fairly detached from the rest of the town, both physically and in their understanding of reality. In fact, you can see that they have literally walled off their complex from the rest of town. Their version of utopia seems, on some level, to be an intent to push scientific achievements. It isn't necessarily to promote happiness, and I would venture a guess that most people's definition of a utopia is a place that is nice to live and not just a place that has, cool buildings. Of course, that was basically the conceit of the Night Circus, and the Night Circus seems awesome, so I don't know, maybe I should re-examine this. I also do not miss the fact that while the Kanes claim to be in financial straits due to their many building projects, they also live in the nicest part of the town. This is the only part of the city where the rich people character models spawn and the buildings are generally fancier, and it's also about as far away from the kin and the working class citizens who mostly live in Earth that you can get. And speaking of the kin, how do the kin fit into this? For them, the abattoir is sacred. Nothing in this new town could replace the thousands of years of history that are locked into the land as it is. On some level, destroying the town is yet another act of paternalism by a colonizing force towards an indigenous people. That's not great, Kanes. Not great at all. Additionally, from a purely logistical standpoint, while Daniil indicates in his plans that everyone will be evacuated from the town before the army bombards it, given that you're meeting at 7 p.m. in the evening to make your decision on the fate of the town, and the army is razing the town the next day, it seems unlikely that a full evacuation will be possible. Moreover, when you talk to the townspeople, some of them indicate that they probably will not leave. As such, a number of people in the town almost surely will die when the army attacks. Then there is the fact that the Polyhedron and the Utopia will kill off nearly all the Kanes. You see, for all their talk of progress and intellectualism, the Kanes are firmly rooted in the past. In particular, the Kanes cannot let go of their patriarch Simon Kane and their matriarch Nina Kana. You do not meet either of these individuals in person over the course of the game, Simon Kane having passed, or rather gone into whatever stasis he was in as his body tried to fight the plague, before Daniil can talk to him, and Nina having died years before the game begins. However, while you do not meet either of these individuals in person, you do still meet them. Hang on with me for a second, because this gets really weird. The game itself does not explain this in a fully coherent way, and the following is what I have pieced together from studying the many bizarre and esoteric conversations on these points. Very sorry if this is not 100% correct, but I'm trying my best here. Okay, the Kanes and the Stomatans determined at some point that certain buildings could serve as a focus with a capital F for a person's soul. A building that is built as a focus can capture a soul even after the individual's body has passed. You already vaguely know this because that's the purpose of the Polyhedron. We've talked about that. But it gets weirder. I'm going to pull up a map that I can hopefully use to illustrate the bizarre series of metaphysical musical chairs that I am about to describe. The Crucible, which is where the Kanes live, holds a focus. You never see the focus, but it is apparently where Simon Kane's body was found when he collapsed from the sand pest. This focus appears to have been used to house the spirit of Nina Kana. However, when Simon finally dies because Ruben dissects him to make the vaccine, which is also apparently the exact same time that Eva died, thanks Georgi for dropping that truth bomb but not really explaining what it meant, his spirit arrives at the same focus at the Crucible. It seems that a focus cannot hold more than one spirit for any length of time. Nina's spirit then migrates to the Polyhedron. It's not entirely clear when all of this happens, but Eva died on day 7, and we know from Clara's conversations with the Kanes that Nina is in the Polyhedron by at least day 9. Unfortunately, the focus at the Crucible is too small to fully contain Simon, given that he's a superhuman galaxy brain. To contain the excess Simon, Georgi, who is Simon's brother, channels his memory. In this way, Georgi serves as the host for the excess of Simon's soul that cannot fit into the focus at the Crucible. From what I understand, this process basically involves Georgi remembering Simon really hard. The Kanes want to move Simon into the Polyhedron, but he cannot be moved there while Khan and his gang of children are living in the Polyhedron. Nina can apparently hang out with the children in the Polyhedron, but Simon is too much of a galaxy brain. He needs the place to himself. Of course, nobody wants to immediately evict the children from the Polyhedron because the Polyhedron has been keeping all of them safe from the plague. Also, the army's out there, and looters, and other child gangs. Seriously, why do people live in this town? And also, Nina needs to be moved out of the Polyhedron before Simon can occupy it, but since the Crucible's focus is still occupied by Simon, again, she cannot go there. So, Victor Kane, her husband, also channels her memory. Thus, by day 10 of the story, Georgi is essentially possessed by excess Simon, and Victor is possessed by Nina. As such, Daniil has some really odd conversations with Victor and Georgi near the end of the game, and at some point you, the player, may realize that you are instead talking to Nina and Simon. Nina can eventually admit that she's possessing Victor's body. Simon never outright says that you're talking to him, but Georgi starts weirdly referring to himself in the third person and talking about how Isidore had described Daniil to him, and yeah, it's definitely Simon. Possession is a temporary solution, however. Once the Polyhedron is evacuated of children, Simon will be moved to his permanent home in the Polyhedron. Presumably, Nina could then be moved back into the focus at the Crucible, assuming there is a focus at the Crucible left to return to. The thing is, you may be skeptical about this whole focus thing and spiritual la-di-da. Daniil certainly is, but let me assure you, it does all work. It's all real. And how do I know this? Well, you see, the cathedral was also built as a focus, but it never functioned properly because, well, it was too human. Cathedrals are made special because of the people who worship in them, but this cathedral was never built for religious reasons. The only person who believed in the cathedral in this way was Eva. If you remember that Eva died in the cathedral, you might see where I'm going with this. And lo and behold, on that last day when Daniil goes into the cathedral to make his choice about the fate of the town, he can climb to the top floor of the cathedral to see Eva. The Kanes have some ridiculous ideas, but the thing is, they aren't wrong, at least not about this one. Eva managed to make the focus of the cathedral work. And again, somehow her death helped usher Simon into the focus at the Crucible, insert hand-wavy metaphysical pseudoscience here. By the way, you might take Eva's presence in the cathedral as another reason not to destroy the town, but Eva does mention to you that she is trapped in the cathedral. Either way, the Kanes tell you that the strain of channeling the memories of the dead, and the fact that a body cannot bear two souls for any length of time, will end up killing both Victor and Georgi. And Maria herself believes that she will only live for about another decade, long enough to see her utopia completed. The only Kane that will be left then is her younger brother Khan, who ironically is the one who rejected most of the family's philosophies. As such, it feels as though there is something deeply wrong with the Kanes being in charge of the forward-thinking utopia when they are so firmly entrenched in their family's past. Yes, it is this clinging to their family and their legacy that led them to develop the Polyhedron in the first place as a way to contain Simon's soul, but progress requires moving forward and letting go. Frankly, the Kanes do not seem capable of that. Still, Daniil's choice is the only one that permanently rids the town of the plague. Moreover, with the town destroyed, the powers that be will kill the Inquisitor, who failed in her mission to protect the town, which will also serve as the sacrifice Artemis needs to receive the blood from the butchers. Those infected who are still alive can be cured. This does not even touch on the fact that, as I discussed in my last video, it is quite possible that the Polyhedron with Simon Kane inside of it was the Udurg that Artemis' father wanted him to preserve all along. Why, it's not totally clear, but I wouldn't entirely put it past Isidore to understand the situation better than I ever could. He is the one who developed the panacea after all. Finally, if it is of any consequence, there is Mark Immortal. Mark is the director of the theater that puts on those prophetic mime performances throughout the game. He is also a utopian and one of Daniil's band. He barely interacts with Daniil. In fact, it is my theory that he's placed in with the utopians partially because Daniil is bad at making friends but needed a complete set of bounds, so Mark by default. At the very end of the game, as any character, you can talk to all of your band about what they believe is going to happen. In his last day conversation with Mark, when Daniil points out that Mark was barely involved with anything that has happened in the past 12 days, Mark notes it should perhaps be meaningful that he is the only person who knows how all of this will end. He is the writer of those prophetic mime performances after all, and yet he still decided to be a utopian. But he also might have a thing for Maria, so who knows, honestly. Of course, you can save both the town and the tower by picking Clara's choice. Part 5.c is saving the town and the Polyhedron best. On the surface, this seems like a really great option. You get to keep the town, this weird anachronistic utopia as it is, and the Polyhedron also gets to stay as a treat. Nothing has to change. The utopians and the kin and the children, they all get what they want. Of course, the town is still misogynistic and violent and stuck in the past, but perhaps Maria and Capella can change that together. given that you've given them both room to work their magic, and, Clara might become a third mistress as well and, fix things with her magic hands. The only difference in the town is that you have now formed a blood cult. Let me rewrite this section title real quick. Is saving the town and the Polyhedron while forming a blood cult in the process best? There we go. Oh, look at this closing cinematic of Clara's ending. Listen to this music. How nice. What a great backdrop for this ritualistic sacrifice. There's a dissonance in the end of Clara's story, and this dissonance is not only present in the ending cinematic. As Daniil and Artemy, you receive the following letter from Clara as she tries to persuade you to pick her ending. I know you have been told that I am a witch, not a saint. They may have even told you that I am the sand pest itself, wearing the masquerade of flesh and blood. They certainly must have told you that I save the castaway and condemn the ingenious. They said that I break the courageous and force them to submit to the plague. But let me tell you one thing. Saints and miracle workers are always covered in blood and filth. Their acts are not necessarily comprehensible to the common folk who expect kindness instead of good and courtesy instead of love. This is not who I am. I know what will happen in 3 days. I will be able to avoid the contradictions that keep you and the Bachelor, or Haruspex, in the dark. Remember, I will perform a miracle in the end. I will perform it with the help of the outcast and the evil. They will survive in order to die, and upon dying they will claim life everlasting. I need them for the miracle to work. What a nice sentiment. It almost makes you forget that she wants to start a blood cult. Clara's choice is the only one that made me actively uncomfortable. As I discussed in my last video, it seems like the right choice for Clara. It honestly doesn't seem like the right choice for anyone else. For all of Clara's talk of love and compassion, she is not the one doing the heavy lifting in terms of sacrificing. No, it is her bound who are the sacrifice. And in fact, Clara has to convince some of her bound pretty hard in order to get them onto Team Blood Cult. Just look at this conversation she has with Aspity. You win, don't you? Aspity, listen to me. I am the harbinger of your death. You can choose what it will be like. Isn't that a little presumptuous? I may yet be the harbinger of yours. Pointless bravado, or are you trying to save face? No, not at all. Well then, let's get started. Will I have time to curse you before I die? Depends on what you choose. Would you like, instead of returning to the earth, to dissolve into the people of the kin and serve Barak, its new foreman? Hey, that sounds attractive. Yes, I'd prefer death like that to any other. Was it your doing? Yes. Tell me what you want from me. I shall lay my hands on you and give you a chance to die like Simon Cain died, if you agree like he did to give your blood to those in thirst. What does Simon have to do with it? A human who tried on the head of Boss will forever remain human, even if the head did fit. I'm already flesh of his flesh. Are you going to give me his blood too? I can see in your eyes that you know the answer already. I do. Well, such is my fate, it seems. Clara and some of the other members of her faction paint the idea of sacrificing themselves for the town as a good thing, as a way to seek redemption. But I have a huge problem with the idea that redemption requires sacrificing one's life. In the immortal words of George Washington, as written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, dying is easy, young man living is harder. To me, the true path to redemption comes through living and atoning for your mistakes by making the world around you a better place. I know that not everyone will necessarily agree with me on this, and fair. At the least, I acknowledge that the idea of redemption through death seems much more reasonable for some sins than others. In fact, for someone like Foreman Oyun, this seems like a reasonably fitting ending, given that he literally murdered Artemy's father. Oyun is moreover one of the few of Clara's bound that willingly volunteers to sacrifice himself, no convincing required. However, most of the people on the list of Clara's bound do not have crimes rising to the level of murder, or even anything close to it. For example, Lara is the most self-sacrificing person in town. The only thing she arguably does wrong is that during Daniil's route, you find out that she has a foolhardy plan to kill Commander Block. But it's not because of a personal vendetta or anything. It's because she hopes that by doing so, the violence in town will stop. Reuben's only crime is that he dissected Simon Kane and yes, technically killed him in the process, but it's worth remembering that Simon was only sort of alive at the time. Reuben made a vaccine from Simon's body that helped a large number of people in town, and there is some evidence to suggest that this is exactly what Simon wanted. Even with Anna Angel, the paranoid former actress who lives in the town and, as it turns out, was at one point involved in a circus that kidnapped children, she has reasons for being who she is. Claire finds out that Anna herself was abducted into the circus and abused to the point of mental instability. Anna has done some truly horrible things, but in some ways she also never stood a chance of turning out to be a normal, functioning person. Frankly, it just feels wrong to ask most of the people on Clara's list of bound to sacrifice themselves. I've debated with people on the Ice Pick Lodge Discord about whether the game necessarily frames the sacrifice of these people as a good thing, as a good choice. I will, I suppose, concede that the game does not necessarily frame their sacrifice as good, but I don't know, my friends. That letter, that music, and the ending cinematic, it's all pretty positive. Also note this conversation between Katerina and Clara at the beginning of the game, which is clear foreshadowing for this ending. Now look here. Since you are holding the threads of life in your wondrous hands, I'm going to entrust you with several people. They are all wicked people. Their souls are black as soot. Each one of them is either an avowed evildoer or hiding a sinister secret. You must take care of them. I don't understand. Taking care of evildoers? If you are a kind angel, a holy miracle worker sent to us from heaven, who else but you could discern some virtue inside their lost souls, convert them, redeem them, forgive them? But that is not the reason I am asking you to take care of them. There are many in our town who need to be purified. There are many worse villains than these, and yet these ones are special. Special to you, Clara. The idea that Clara is responsible for converting and redeeming and forgiving her bound, and what she comes up with is a blood cult to save the town, I don't like it. There's also this conversation with Reuben when he suggests the idea of using the blood of her bound to create panacea. There's something even lofty about it. Many will agree to atone for the wrongs they've inflicted on the town in their lifetimes. There is, after all, no shortage of such villainous characters here. Bad Grief, Yulia, the Saburovs, Anna, even yours truly. Do I need to give any further examples? You could easily think of a half-dozen more yourself. But again, game, these people are not all villainous. My gosh, they're especially lacking in villainy when you're throwing into the mix someone like Laura who wants to sacrifice herself, but based on comments that various characters make about her, also probably has untreated depression from her father's death, and that's why she wants to sacrifice herself. I told you, actively uncomfortable. Part of this weird dissonance in Clara's ending is likely due to the fact that Clara's story is the most rushed. In fact, the developers acknowledged that they did not intend for this to be her original ending. Well, initially we were going to rest content with just the destruction, but we quickly slapped together a different ending which had this sacrificial miracle in it. On the whole, though, we didn't really plan anything, to be honest. There just wasn't enough time to think it through. Yeah, it seems that basically in the original plan, Clara's ending was that she was going to kill the whole town as the embodiment of the plague, but then they changed it. So in comparison, I guess, Clara killing only 7 people seems like a real bargain. All of this discussion does not even touch on the fact that in contrast to The Bachelor and the Harrispex endings, the plague is guaranteed to return in Clara's ending. This is no long-term solution. In another 5 years or so, there will be another outbreak, and unless Artemy has finally talked the kin into telling him how to access that sweet, sweet bull blood, more people will have to be sacrificed. Actually, now I want a minigame set in this ending, where Artemy's going on a treasure hunt trying to find the bull blood while avoiding the butchers. Maybe it's like a point-and-click adventure or something? Ice Pick Lodge, what do I have to do to make this happen? But odds are, Claire has locked the town into a cycle of plague outbreak followed by her sacrificing more people in order to save the people who are infected. In a town that already has so many dead, the idea that the city has to keep sacrificing in order to keep the plague at bay seems incredibly bleak to me. Additionally, Claire has to remain in the town indefinitely so she can do the magic hands trick on the next set of bound when the plague returns once more. As I mentioned in my last video, she may be able to stay in the town and go off and have her army adventures simultaneously, depending on how her 2 places at once ability actually works, but Some version of her can never leave. For someone whose journey is all about discovery and claiming her personhood, that feels very sad. Part 6. There's more to this than meets the eye. You may have noticed that Part 5 was all about determining which ending is best, and while I discussed the many pros and cons to the various endings, too many probably, we are now entering Part 6 with no clear answer to our question in sight. And that is because if you are familiar with Pathologic and its endings, you may have realized that the above discussion of Daniil, Artemy, and Claria's choices is leaving out a very important part of Pathologic lore: the secret endings. Don't worry, friends. I have not forgotten about the secret endings. In fact, I deliberately obfuscated them so that I could save their discussion to this point. If you are not familiar with Pathologic, buckle up, my friends. We're about to step into a whole nother level of weird meta-commentary. As I've discussed many times now, when you play as a given character, as long as you're bound or all cured of the plague by 7 p.m. on day 12, you can go to the cathedral and present your choice of what to do with the town to Commander Block of the army. However, on day 12, you will also receive letters from your fellow protagonists asking to meet, and if you talk to them, they will request that you cure their bound as well. If they know that you are taking care of their bound, this will give them time to prepare their arguments, so they can also present the respective proposals to Commander Block. That might seem like a counterintuitive thing for you to do. As I've already stated ad nauseum, each character's choice seems very fitting for them. But trust me, it's in your best interest to humor your fellow protagonists and give everyone a fighting chance. I mean, honestly, it's not really a fighting chance because regardless of the protagonist you're playing as, Block is gonna let you choose what to do with the town, but we're not gonna tell that to these poor saps over here. If you cure at least one other set of bound, you receive another letter. This time it's from, the powers that be. It tells you to come to the bottom floor of the Polyhedron. When you arrive, you are greeted with a new scene. The powers that be are two children. The girl is called Thrush and the boy is called Measly, though these are not their real names. The town is an elaborate sand castle they built in their sand pit, and you, along with everyone else in the town, is a doll. The Plague is a game that they are playing because they are processing the fact that their grandfather recently died. Yes, the secret ending of Pathologic is the same as the ending of the Lego movie, only crank that existentialism up to 15. Needless to say, 2/3 of the protagonists do not take this well. Both Daniil and Artemy can threaten to beat up the children, which the boy in the most patronizing way possible mostly finds funny. He will also tell Daniil that he is the scary clown doll. He's the villain when they play. So is Artemy, whose doll apparently has a ripped up face. Ha! Ripper, I get it. However, the boy begs them to find a way to save their town. Both children beg. Rot has set into the sand of their little town, you see, but the children do not want to destroy the town. They love it. It's the best sandcastle they've ever built, after all. This might seem like a cheap ploy on the part of the developers the first time you play the game, but it actually explains quite a bit. Like the worms, they're actual worms in the sandbox. Or the sand pest being named as it is. The town is in the middle of the plains, there's no sand. Oh, there is. Yeah, that makes sense. Or the fact that all of the background characters look generic, because it's definitely not just because the devs use the same character models because they did not have an abundance of funding. No, these background characters are literally the same dolls being used over and over. Or that you'll occasionally get weird comments from townspeople like, "My stomach feels like it's stuffed with straw." Or the fact that the albino can tell you that the town is only a month old despite there being literally thousands of years of history for it. It also explains why the powers that be were so insistent that you save the town at the expense of everyone in it. To them, the dolls are expendable, replaceable. The town is not. And in fact, if you have Artemy talk to Aglaia on that last day in the cathedral, you can find out that she also knows the truth about their world. She was the doll that their children's mother used to sleep with. The children don't like her, possibly because their mother favors her doll so much. This is why Aglaia will be killed if the town is not saved. It also explains why Aglaia serves as a fitting sacrifice for the town for the butcher's purposes, because knowing the truth of their world as she does, she is a bit more than human, and therefore her death would be commensurate to the bull's lifeblood. In fact, regardless of whether you get that second letter and meet the powers that be or not, they are part of the ending cinematics. I cut them out when I showed them in the previous videos, but they're there. Destroying the town, pulling out the Polyhedron, giving food offerings to the sandbox gods. On Clara's route, you get to meet the children early, on day 9. When you do, you realize that Clara's dual nature is due to the children themselves arguing about who she is. The girl thinks that Clara represents the plague, while the boy thinks she's a miracle worker. If Clara meets with the powers that be on day 12, it's more of an encore than anything. When I see discussions on the endings of Pathologic, I usually do not see people take into account this framework, the fact that the town is a game played by children. But I think this matters in the discussion. For Daniil, oh geez, poor Daniil. I had been spoiled about the secret ending coming into the game, and yet despite that, when the boy said that Daniil is the scary clown doll and the villain, I was honestly furious on his behalf. How dare this child judge me and my cranky academic friend? We have been through so much in this dang town. We've tried so hard to keep people alive. How dare he claim that Daniil is still the villain? I know that Daniil feels the same way in this encounter because while his and Artemis' dialogue is fairly similar when they meet the powers that be, there are some differences. Notably, the girl asks both of them to save the town, and Daniil can tell the girl that he will destroy it out of spite. And frankly, I felt that. Daniil's story is all about fighting against fate and inevitability. This realization that he is nothing more than a toy in the hands of uncaring children seems like the final crushing blow for him. It turns out there was never any death to defeat because Daniil was never even alive. His research was always meaningless. In fact, his lab Thanatica probably only exists in the children's imaginations, a backstory and nothing more. As such, destroying the town makes extra sense for him. Yes, because of spite, but also because the children want to preserve the town so much that choosing the town over the tower feels like giving into fate, and Daniil's whole shtick is refusing to believe that fate exists. For Artemis, however, the same conversation with the girl ends with him saying that he will preserve the town. This makes sense for Artemis as well. He is bound to the town by love and duty. The fact that there are child overlords, that doesn't change anything. To Artemis, the right decision is always going to be the right decision, regardless of who wants him to choose it and why. He can leave all of the existentialism to Daniil. And for Clara? Frankly, even though the powers that be seem especially shocked that Clara has come to life on day 9, she has a much more congenial relationship with them than either Daniil or Artemis. It seems that the children can sense that Clara is more alive and aware than the other two protagonists, and therefore they are more willing to acknowledge her as a person. The children are fighting over whether she will save or kill her bound, and in a sense, Clara can do both, and cure everyone else in the process. Even to the children, this ending is miraculous. So, part 6.a, what does the secret ending actually change? If meeting the children does not change the choice that any of the protagonists will want to make, what does it matter? Does it affect which choice is the right one? Well, I think it does. Bear with me for a second because I have to go on a bit of a limb here, but I don't think what I'm about to say is totally insane. The children obviously built the town out of sand, and then they stuck this weird plastic thing into the side to make the Polyhedron. My guess is that the weird plastic thing is some sort of small water cooler. Measley mentions that rot has overcome their sand town, and I think there's a good chance that water drained from the water cooler into the sand and caused an infestation of rot. I am no expert gardener, but I do have a number of houseplants and I've lost a few to rot. The thing is, when rot sets in, there isn't much you can do. You pretty much have to just remove the rotted portion of the plant and soil and throw it out. As such, if anything, maybe this realization supports destroying the town. The children love the sand city they have built, but there is no way to extricate it from the rot. Better for them to level the town, throw the bad sand out, and start a new city now, which will save them from more heartache down the road. The other two endings won't fix this problem, most likely. Since the rot has already set in, removing the polyhedron structure won't change anything. I don't even know what they're trying to accomplish with Clara's ending. I'm pretty sure that offering gigantic ostrich eggs to the sandbox gods won't fix your rot problem, kiddos. I mean, seriously, look at the size of those eggs and lemons compared to the loaves of bread. In fact, if you let all this food stay out in your damp garden, everything is just going to get moldy and make things worse. Oh gosh, is that why Plague Part 2, the plaguening, is inevitable in Clara's route? Because the town gets all moldy? Okay, this is just getting gross. Back to the point, knowing that everyone is a doll in a sand town makes me worry even more about Clara's ending. They show the kids giving this food offering, but does Clara sacrificing her bound mean that the children are actually destroying those bound dolls? Are they ripping them up, these dolls that now have no ability to transcend above their sackboy existence? Of course, this is a fairly objective reading of the situation that does not take into account the subjective experience of the dolls within the town. And in the minds of the character dolls, and probably in yours as the player as well, it is impossible to divorce what is actually happening in this garden from what the character's experience is happening in this weirdo town with a wasp nest tower that you've been exploring for the last 12 days. I can't exactly criticize that. On some level, if you'll allow me to wax existential for a moment, I understand that I myself am bound by 4 dimensions that I personally see and experience, but there are probably dimensions beyond my comprehension that would affect the way I view myself in my life if I understood what they were. Yet, understanding their existence would probably not change the fact that my life in my 4 measly dimensions is the only one I can live. And so, keeping in mind both the objective reality of the town with the subjective experience of the characters who live in it, we come back to the question from the beginning, which is the best ending? Should Daniil go with his first instinct to preserve the Polyhedron, which represents a pinnacle of achievement over death, even though he now knows that achievement to be hollow because he is not, in fact, even fully alive? Is it instead justifiable for Daniil to decide to preserve the Polyhedron because he refuses to give in to fate and inevitability? Or does it merely show that Daniil, as he is often accused, lacks compassion, this time for the children who are too young to fully understand him and the world that he experiences? Should Artemy choose to keep the town, even though the rot problem in the sand seems unlikely to be fixed by doing so? Does the rot problem in the sand being untouched mean that the plague will come back sooner than expected and with a vengeance? Or is the fact that the Polyhedron really a plastic bottle make it the best sacrifice, given that in reality it can be easily reattached somewhere else? In the minds of the characters, perhaps that means it can be effortlessly rebuilt away from the town. Will Clara's choice even do anything, considering that it apparently means the children make offerings of food to the sandbox? Or is the most alive of the protagonists, can Clara actually perform a miracle, both in her subjective world but also in the objective world of the garden? And more to the point, is Clara's choice the product of a doll trying to claim her personhood? Or is it a childish decision that it is better to preserve everything than to sacrifice something now in exchange for a better future? Is that even healthy for these children who are struggling to learn how to move on after the loss of their grandfather? Why does Peter have a bathtub in his living room? And do any of the buildings of this town have a bathroom? Please tell me it is not this weird room that appears in some of the houses that just has a bucket in the corner. Andre, why did you name one of your creations House House? Why is there a house that is named House House out there? Why is there a door here that you can see on the outside that is not present on the inside, and it should not be fully covered by this cabinet? Why does the cathedral look like a giant spider? Why do the dog heads wear these weird dog heads? Can they even see out of them? Artemy apparently just started walking to the town when he received his father's letter and happened upon a shunt locomotive on the way. What was the plan if you didn't happen upon a train, Artemy? You don't seem to have packed any food or extra clothes. Who is the rat prophet? Why does he dress so dapper? Who makes his tiny tailored clothes? Why is Bad Grief the only one with a southern accent? And how does Daniil shoot so well? Do the Olgimskis hate Yulia because she's a lesbian? Why do I— Part 7. I think I need to take a breather. Part of the reason I find myself inexorably drawn back into pondering Pathologic is that there are no clear answers to these questions. I'm talking specifically about the questions about the endings of Pathologic, not my mental breakdown, though there are no clear answers to those questions as well. But trust me, I spent days obsessively agonizing over the endings, playing around with them in my head, weighing the pros and cons. And it was in the midst of this mental agony that I had a sudden realization. I was thinking about Daniil, about how angry I was that the children had dismissed him as the scary clown doll, even though I knew he had worked so hard to save the town, how he had grown in the process. I thought about how I wish I had my own creepy Daniil doll because I just wanted to hug him and tell him that he was okay. Tell him that the experience that he had with the town was not invalidated by the fact that the town is made of sand or that he is stuffed with cotton. And then I thought about myself. I am fairly religious. I've also had, well, not the easiest couple of years. I think that's probably true of most of us. I realized as I thought about how much I wanted to reassure Daniil that my response to Daniil's pain is the same response that I often feel from my God when I talk to him about, how meaningless life often feels. And he tells me it's okay. Life is hard. And in the end, you will die and pass on and be forgotten by the world probably sooner than is fair. But your life is still meaningful. Even if it is fleeting and full of struggle and pain, even if it is forgotten or dismissed by other people, it is meaningful because it is your life. Your existence. Someday, all of this will pass. You, viewer, might not be religious. You might think that everything I've just said in the past minute is simply the product of my imagination. That's fine, I'm not here to push my beliefs onto you. I mention this simply because it pushed me to change the way I was thinking about Pathologic's endings. And in so doing, I finally understood what Pathologic is really about. And I'll tell you, viewer, in the next video. This one is long enough already. At any rate, thank you for watching this. I'm sorry it's taking me so long to get to my point, but there's just so much to talk about with Pathologic. It's such a fascinating game, and I have to get it out of my system. If you have any interest in playing Pathologic after watching this, please do it. Don't be scared by the difficulty. It's not really that hard. And, like, subscribe. It thrush them easily. They think they like it. Subscribing's a swell idea, in addition to, offering giant food to sandboxes to get what you want from life. That is definitely okay. I'm done here. I'll see you in the next video.